Hope everybody is well and safe. It's a trying situation here in Victoria, as we all know at the moment, but I think that most Victorians are pulling together and trying to make the best out of a difficult situation. We've got 28 attendees on here at the moment. We're waiting for about another 28, I think, all up. Hopefully you were all able to order something with the Uber Eats voucher or vouchers. A little bit of a administrative error there this morning, but it came through in two lots. So hopefully you got something good to eat. A few more have just joined. And this is the second Education Leaders Forum that we've run so far this year, and we got some pretty good feedback on the first one. Everyone was said that it was an extremely good event and that liked the speakers. One person said more Gavin May, which I'm not quite sure. I think that was my mum. Mum, you got the voucher, you just keep quiet now, will you, love? Or perhaps it was a reference to a little bit of COVID weight that I've gained, and that there is now more Gavin May. Either way, hopefully that will go shortly. We've got some great speakers this afternoon. I want to introduce Travis Smith from Microsoft. We have Thomas Ferguson from Barracuda, and we have Lior Rauschberger from MyDNA and Vivi. I think that you've heard from all of them at some point or other. I know I've been listening to Travis Smith for many years now and always find his talks extremely good and educating and relevant to what we're doing and what's going on at the moment. Got a few more still joining. So just to mention a couple of things that have been going on here with Trident. As you've seen over the last couple of weeks, maybe, we've started to get some new branding as we become more under the Spirit umbrella. We have a new website that was launched this week, which is really good and exciting. Please go and have a look at that. Same old sales team, I'm afraid, except we do have a new addition to the team, which is David Mikhail, and I'm sure that you'll meet him at some point or other. Since the last time that we spoke to you all on one of these forums, we have actually had a new addition to the Spirit group as well, which is Voice, Print and Data Group, which are based up in Queensland but have presence all around Australia, and they do exactly what it says on the tin. They do voice, they do print, and they do data. But this enables us to add a whole range of new products to the Trident offering, particularly around some exciting things like Teams calling. I think a lot of you have all jumped on Teams in the last few months, and I know Travis is going to touch on that. And that's what a lot of schools are now looking at to replace their PABXs, adding Teams calling functionality, and we can help there. We also have a print offering as well. And we've seen some other exciting new products coming through, like HP notebooks, the ProBook 435, the 830 and the 1030 X360 models. They are G7 models are starting to come through, and we're starting to see the pricing for that. So we'll be sending through proposals shortly. And also the Lenovo L13 and X13. These are all yogas and you know, again, dear to all our hearts. And I know Travis loves the power of the stylus and the pen. So these are all great products for you to do that now. We've got about 39, 40 on the call. I think just as well to talk about COVID quickly. Obviously this week's been a huge week in Victoria with the stage 4 restrictions that are coming in. Look, our first priority is definitely to our staff, but we are working with the government regulations to ensure that where we can and where we need to go on site to support you, we will do, and we are. So that's being worked through at the moment. We also have a couple of great case studies that we've just done recently. One is on Aruba at Peninsula Grammar. And we also have another one which we've just completed on the Knox School and SimpliVity. So we'll be posting that one up soon as well. So it'd be great for you to go and have a look at those. Look, I think we're just at that point where we'll start to kick off. I'm going to hand over the mic to Jeff Bentley. I think you all know Jeff. So Jeff, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Gavin, and welcome everyone. As Gavin mentioned, this is our second Zoom online forum. And after our first successful one, we thought we'd continue and keep everyone involved. So key ingredients in today's format is obviously you've got your mask, and you've got your wine, and we've got the Panadol. So we will be playing a game later, and whoever wins that pack. But the most important part about these conferences and this new forum is to try and make it as interactive as possible. So as our previous Zoom forum, it was interactive. So please ask questions, send it in the chat, and we'll ask the keynote speakers at the appropriate times to answer those questions. So please make it interactive because it makes it so much better for anyone else. And I would like to thank and back Gavin up on having our keynote speakers, and you'll hear them a little bit later. So again, thanks for everyone's involvement and participation, and we'll move forward. So we're going to start with who am I? So I'll go through this, and whoever gets the who am I will win the wine, the face mask, and the Panadol. Okay, here we go. I graduated from college in 1991 with all high distinctions. A core of us, 7 close school friends, decided we either wanted to be either a doctor or a lawyer. On celebrating our Year 12 achievements, we decided on our career at the popular Chasers nightclub. As what high-level, highly intelligent people do to take their career that next step or start their career, a decision on career was on a flip of a coin. Heads, it was doctors, or tails, it was lawyer. The coin flipped on tails, and the 7 close, highly intelligent people decided to become doctors. I completed my medicine degree at Monash University and exited in 1997 with, again, high honours. I was a regular commentator for Triple M for 5 years on technology. I'm a serial entrepreneur and find myself as founder and CEO of Vivi and My DNA. My name is Lior. Correct. Alex from De La Salle, you win that pack. So congratulations. We'll get that over to you at appropriate time. You're not far from us, so we'll be able to actually do a face-to-face. So congratulations, Alex, and well done. So am I packing back to you, Gav, aren't I?
Yep, that's great.
Okay, back to you,
Gav.
Gav.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Jeff. So next, our first keynote speaker today is Travis Smith. You all know Travis. Travis has over 12 years experience in the classroom, managed one of the first one-to-one technology programs in the country, starting in the mid-1990s. He's currently the education industry lead for Microsoft Australia, which involves managing Microsoft's education programs, professional learning experiences, and providing advice to large education jurisdictions as to the role of technology in the education. We've, as I said earlier, I've been listening to Travis for probably about 12 years now, since I first got into Australia, and when I was working at Ivanhoe. Always found him extremely interesting, relevant, and backing up what he says with research as well, which is always good. So hopefully, Trav, don't let us down, don't let me down. The pressure's on, mate. Over to you, Travis Smith.
Thanks, Gavin. Hopefully you can see my slides okay. So thank you everyone and welcome aboard. 15 minutes is not a long time to share what's going on in the current climate, but I'll give it a crack. So yeah, optimizing learning in the new normal is something that is obviously close to everyone's heart at the moment. And no doubt you've all experienced, especially those of you in IT roles, the impact of this and the amount of transformation that you potentially have had to make in such a short time. Satya Nadella, our CEO, talks about the idea of 2 years worth of digital transformation globally within 2 months during this COVID epidemic. And obviously there's some outcomes of that for the world, for the economy, for the future of cloud technology, for example, but also for education. And recently we published a paper called Education Reimagined with Michael Fullan and others. Michael Fullan is like a leader in systemic change around system transformation in education and quite a well-known person globally in the education sphere. And this paper, you can see the link down the bottom to download a copy of that and have a look, sort of talked about 3 different phases of what we've been going through. I should mention too that there's also a blog post. I'll share these slides out through the Trident team. And a webinar if you want to listen to them, or you have some of your educators in the schools listen to Michael Fullan and Joanne Quinn, some of the authors, talk through this. But they talked about 3 different phases of what we've gone through with the COVID experience in education. The first one being disruption, which was that idea of everything suddenly has to go online. And no doubt many of you were doing a power of work in that time to make sure that things that you'd been implementing for years were up and running, in place and ready to go for teachers and learners to shift completely online during this lockdown. And of course in Victoria now we're in another one. So we've got that challenge all over again. The second phase was when really schools sort of opened back up. And we've been through that once and we'll be going through it again. Hopefully we know how to do that now. The real opportunity for us is around phase 3. Phase 3 is described as reimagining learning. And there were some interesting findings about what we saw during the COVID lockdown, a couple of which are relevant for us as an IT audience. You know, technology shifted from being a vehicle for delivery to a true collaboration platform. You know, we had students really beaming in from home via Teams, via Zoom, via whatever else, to start being part of learning. And that was something that was really interesting. And the collaboration among teachers and leaders also came to the fore. And the focus around how to do that and how we do that collaboration became really, really clear and important for schools to cover. In terms of the reimagination phase, which is sort of like moving forward after we get out of this system, it's really about, and what we're spending a lot of our time focusing on, is what might now be possible as a result of what we've experienced. The challenge is the status quo has a gravitational pull that works against change. So it's going to be very easy for schools to go back to what education always looked like, but we think there's some possibilities for it moving forward. And obviously technology and your partners involved in that will have a pivotal role. One of the things is in this paper that they talk about is this sort of reflection process of, which might be good for a school to start thinking about when students come back again, if you're in Victoria, or now if you're in other states where schools are back working face to face. You know, what did we learn about kids? What did we learn about families? What did we learn about our own systems? What really worked well? Who struggled the most and why? And what sort of interventions can we make in the future? Is there a possibility of us shifting towards a different model of education for our kids? They also talk about the idea that there are kind of 2 conditions required for what we call a learning revolution. The first one is to understand that the existing system of education might be struggling a bit. It could be a bit antiquated, it could be a bit out of date, it could be better ways to do things. And up until COVID, we didn't really have the second bit, which was a viable alternative model. And I think now what we've seen is the idea of the possibility of using this blended mode of face-to-face and online. And, you know, maybe kids don't need to be at school from 9 till 3:30 every single day. Maybe there are some other possibilities. And so we at Microsoft have been focusing a lot on this idea of hybrid learning. And we call hybrid learning an approach to combining the best of face-to-face learning, but also incorporating successful practices from the flipped and blended and remote and other online learning approaches to kind of make really student-centered and profoundly personalized experience for students. We know that many of the schools who have been doing sort of one-to-one programs for a long time wouldn't have had to change that much, but there are a whole raft of schools around the world and in Australia who really did have to change and are now reflecting on this as a new normal. And we know at some points in time there were 1.6 billion students around the world who were not attending a school, but were working either online or doing no learning at all. And so we have to sort of think about what the futures might be. in terms of, you know, the futures that Microsoft are focusing on, and there's many of them, you know, we see that there's some engines for our future moving forward, both with COVID and without COVID ever having existed. Some of these things are really being accelerated, like Satya Nadella spoke about. But, you know, the idea of artificial intelligence is one of the things that I want to pick up on during this short presentation, and about how, you know, we know that there are going to be some negative impacts around artificial intelligence, but we also know there's going to be really positive impacts around artificial intelligence, and that jobs will change, just like they did when, you know, back in the 1920s, automotive vehicles were introduced, and got rid of the massive industry around horses to keep, you know, to keep a city like New York running at the time. But we're going to see, you know, we see these sort of examples of the Nightscope security bot, AI bot, that's eyes flash different colors when it sees danger around a car park environment to keep people safe. And we thought we were going to get these amazing sort of robots to help us out. And in actual fact, you know, all we got were suicidal robots that were sort of dropping into ponds because they forgot to design that in. And so we're going to see some really positive things. We're going to see some kind of tough change going on. Technology's ripping forward. Education's kind of hard to shift. And we're at a precipice, I think, at the moment where we might be able to change some of these things. So one of the things we do know, if we think about, you know, the role of data and artificial intelligence and those sorts of things, is that, you know, educational technologies from all the different vendors you work with weren't actually designed to interoperate. But we do know that there are real tangible benefits for educators and for students and for systems, if you're in a system, when we do get that data interoperating. So let me talk about that for a moment, about how we can get a 360-degree view of the student. So this is something coming down the pipe in Office 365, which gives you a systemic view of what's going on within your tenant, what's going on within your environment, how much people are working on certain types of things, how long people are spending doing certain types of things. And so that's really interesting as a system analytics sort of perspective. We think about this idea of all of these inputs of data, LMSs and assessment platforms and educational technology providers and Mathletics and, you know, your student information system and all that sort of stuff being inputted into kind of this idea of a data lake, you know, within Azure, and allowing all that data to sit together. And then the exciting element of having all that data together is what might be possible as a result of that, because you can truly get down the path of education analytics. And I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about what we're seeing so far around the world in that. And we also have created something called a K-12 accelerator. And what that is kind of like, think of it like a data model. And it's kind of like, imagine a data scientist is working on your team and they've already cracked the nut of how to be able to plug your grades in there and your attendance in there and your behavior in there and your extracurricular activities into a data model and allow you to start to leverage those data sets. And we're seeing that sort of being rolled out around the world at the moment. So there's pretty interesting things in this space. I suppose really what we're focused on at Microsoft is this idea of an intelligent platform. And that is the platform for collaboration that teachers use and students learn on every day in Office 365 and other parts of our solutions, being sort of smarter than ever before and leveraging the internal artificial intelligence that is built into these platforms. And so what you can see here is a view of what's called My Analytics. Sits in my email, and it's really giving me insights. It's kind of dipping your toe in the water of some insights that a intelligent platform can serve up to me. And it's telling me, you know, when am I focused, who am I collaborating with, which is really important for us in at Microsoft, for example. And if I drill into the collaboration piece, what am I doing during meetings? How often am I multitasking? How many times am I replying to things outside of work hours? How often am I asking people to reply to me? And I'm asking that outside of work hours. There's some real insights that we're starting to see. And so everything we're doing around sort of the development of something like Teams, for example, which I know many of you have been using for meetings and things in schools, and also live events, which allows you to do sort of webinar kind of broadcasts. All of this intelligence of this platform is sort of being built in. One example of that is where, you know, obviously Stream within Office 365, having the automatic creation of closed captions, so that you can then sort of interrogate that data using bots and AI, which I'll tell you a story about in a second. Obviously, there's some insights coming into something like Teams too, which I know many of you are using. So this is just the assessment dashboard that comes in Teams when you set assignments via Teams and how many people are missing their assignments and so forth. But we introduced during COVID this idea of something called Class Insights. And the intent of Class Insights was really to give people a view, give teachers a view of at what points during the day were my students active online. And if I hover over one of those and click on the blue line, what were they actually doing within our platform at that time? To give us some insight of what they were actually focused on, how many times during the day they were working on those things, etc. And so the new view of that, which is coming out shortly, actually brings a true level of insight across the top of that. And it starts to help teachers by saying, you know, Ella Taylor hasn't submitted her comedy of errors yet. The average score on this writing task around poetry was 66. That seems quite low. And so it's interpreting the data that's in the background and offering it up as insights to teachers. And we know that there's opportunities for us to use this intelligent platform to do even more. For example, we know that you've got spell checks and things in every different program, but why are teachers still having to create spelling lists? You know, doesn't it know what they can't spell? And shouldn't we be able to click some sort of a button to have that spelling list automatically generated and spat out? We know that there's immersive technologies in the suite that uses artificial intelligence to be able to read out aloud and to find nouns and verbs and adjectives in written text using Immersive Reader. And we know that there's real-time language translation in all of the products as well. We also know that there's possibility of doing self-marking mathematics assessments in different ways using embedded forms within OneNote pages. We know that Dr. David Kellerman, who I'll talk to you about in a sec, is doing some interesting research work around the idea of having artificial intelligence be able to mark hand-drawn diagrams in engineering with great accuracy. And so that might be a game changer for us. Some of you may have heard this story before. It's a higher ed example, but it kind of pulls this story together into some way to think about what is the future of these intelligent platforms if we can sticky tape it all together and get a data schema underneath it. So David Callum is a lecturer at University of New South Wales, and his classes are, there's a photograph, 500 to 1,000 students. And so he was pretty innovative anyway. He used OneNote to write his engineering notes, and they would appear on the screen and synchronize everyone else. He used to live stream his lectures into YouTube and have people actually respond to his questions live, so he could actually respond to the questions live. They were sort of moderated. And then he had this idea of pulling all that together in teams. As a result of creating that community of learners, he had a 900% increase in collaboration. And so he pulled all of the things in, he got the stuff out of YouTube, put it into Stream, all the collaborative documents together. And he also brought in his Moodle experience and some engineering software. But the important thing of underlying that was he was creating a data schema. He had all of his things in one spot. And what he was doing was able to create this massive data set around his learners and their behavior so that he could start to do some pretty magic things with AI, which I'll talk about. One of the main problems he had was that he created a new problem for himself. And that new problem was basically that he couldn't keep up with all the questions and comments that were coming in when he had a 900% increase. So they created a bot. And the bot sat in teams, and when a person had a question, they would literally do the @ symbol before the word question. I have an @ question about whatever, and it would turn the bot on. The bot would start listening to the question. And then it would also be able to be flagged. When the question was asked, it would flag one of the tutors in that student's experience. And when the tutor answered a question, they would flag that as the correct answer to that question. And what they ended up with after even a couple of weeks was 200 topic categorized question and answer pairs that the artificial intelligence system now understood about first year engineering. And so you can imagine where this is going when they enabled the bot to start answering questions, or at least pointing people to the right spot in the Teams environment or elsewhere to find the answer to certain questions. They had a lot of students working on pen and paper. So he created and uploading photographs to Teams saying, I can't do this question, or can you help me with this? So he created a workbook with a QR code so that the artificial intelligence understood what question the student was working on when they uploaded a photo, and then being able to scan that QR code and return answers that you can see on the right-hand side. And the other thing that he was able to do too was to get to a point where the bot would actually return as answer, it's lecture 3, minute 8, second 13, you need to start listening from if you want to find the answer to that question. Because all the transcriptions that were automatically happening via artificial intelligence under the stream videos were actually being leveraged as a data source. And so this is where it gets pretty nerdy. I'll go through fast because I'm running out of time. They produced Power BI dashboards for assessments for students so they could see where their learning was at. But then they trained a machine learning model in the Azure Azure Land. And basically the idea was to train the system to understand the engineering curriculum from really simple things to quite complex things at different levels of ability. And they basically put in 2016 data, because they had some data sets around the 2016 students. And they realized that this machine learning model could predict performance, because they had the 2016 exams by then. They could predict performance with about 90% accuracy using this data model. And so then they were able to apply this algorithm, this machine learning system, to the current set of students. And 2 weeks before their exams, they were able to create individual study guides for 500 students with a click of a button, which told them about the 10 or 15 different areas of the course which that looks like they're going to fall down on. And so they had massive improvements in results. His pass rate in first year engineering was going from 65 to 85%. And so we're starting to see these huge experiences and opportunities for us to use this data and AI system to focus more and more on how we can help teachers to do wonderful things. A couple of last things to finish. Some of you will have seen the Education Transformation Framework, which is kind of our evidence-based example of a framework that looks at system-wide success and school-wide success, and what are the key elements of things that you need to sort of that seem to be consistent across successful systems and schools. And in the intelligent environments parts, which is really about IT, there's hybrid learning, which is enabling the platforms to enable this new kind of learning, this new kind of normal. There's safety and security, optimized operations, and advanced analytics. And we sort of think about questions like you can see there on the bottom of the slide, which is about, what sort of things have you got in place in this world? Can education institutions optimize and limit resources based on whatever they've got in terms of school operations? How's that back end office experience going? What about the last point there about collecting and data and so forth? And so one of the things that we've created out of that too, the link is bottom left on the slide there, is this Edu Journeys page, which allows you, and it wouldn't just be an IT discussion, because you can see there that some of these are IT-led discussions, and some of them are really teaching and learning discussions. So there's a combination there where you might be able to use this tool, this evaluation tool, to pull together where are we at on our journey around digital transformation, and what might we be able to do next to move forward. And so with that, I'll say thank you and leave you with a couple of resources. The learning paper there, the Education Transformation Framework. I've put in the Educator Centre there, which is where teachers can get free PD. You can share that with your staff, and the Edu Journey tool that I just described. So with that, thank you, and I'll let the others take over.
Hey Travis, thanks very much for that. Look, we've got a bit of time, because surprised me actually, Jeff didn't talk quite as long as he normally does. So I've got a question here, and look, guys, we want this to be interactive, so please feel free to pop any questions in the notes that are in the chat there, and I'll pass them on to Travis. But I've got one here. What are the already published features coming to Teams is Travis most looking forward to? Any others he would like to see that would provide a wow moment for users of the O365 ecosystem?
Good question. There's a couple. I'm not going to show you this video, but you can find it on YouTube. One of the things that we're releasing at the end of the year is called the Learning App. And the Learning App is going to sit within Teams environment and allow you to create, curate, and disseminate training materials or professional learning across your organization. And so if you think about the idea of teachers onboarding to your school, many of you are in technology-rich schools where you have quite a difficult ecosystem for someone who comes from straight out of university, or someone who's coming from another school where they're not so technology-rich. To have sort of a onboarding process or set of courses that they might be able to do, which can be managed within a Teams app that sits right within Teams within your environment. It allows leaders to disseminate courses and also track how many people have done those courses and where people are at. So that's something that's coming out later in the year, and there's a video on YouTube. If you just search for Learning App in Microsoft Teams, you'll find a preview of it. The narrative is really about business, but I'm pretty excited about the possibilities for schools. One of the other ones is aside from all the rich analytics and stuff that we're seeing, is the advent of breakout rooms. Teachers have kind of got around this idea of formal breakout rooms within teams by using different channels and sort of saying, you know, let's name this channel for the next workshop, and then people come into the main channel and go to the main session and then drop out into a sub channel, which has got them and their 5 mates in it. And then they start a call within there and they have sort of breakout rooms. Very easy for a teacher then to jump between channels and join each of those 5 calls, and you'll just see on your Teams call then that half of them are on pause and one of them is live, and you can jump between them. So that's the way that we currently do, you know, breakout rooms within Teams. But there is a more formal way coming, and it's coming within a couple of months. So that's going to be interesting, especially around our work with, you know, remote learning, but also the future of this blended learning initiative, this hybrid learning initiative, that combination of the face-to-face and online, and what are the best aspects. And also in higher education, we're going to see some impact from that too. There's a whole raft of development around, for example, the David Kellerman story I told you there. You know, we actually had him work with the product teams in Microsoft for 6 or 8 weeks last year. And so you should expect to see some of these analytics and AI functions be built into the product or baked in as we move forward, as the platform continues to grow. And I think there was something like 1.6 or 1.7 million teachers and students using the Teams platform for learning once we were all sort of remote learning and so forth. So huge, there's a whole other list I could talk about, but that's a couple of things that are exciting for me.
Cool. And I've got a couple of questions here. Well, Brian Griffiths has just said, is everyone aware of the attendance report in Teams that needs to be turned on via PowerShell, but it works well? I think it's just more of a comment than a question. Greg Neal says that the full 4-call limit makes the current breakout room method somewhat limited. Is that going to be addressed as well, Trav?
Yeah, I assume it means that 4 calls simultaneously running at once. Yeah, so that the breakout experience will make that different. So it's because we're using a bit of a workaround at the moment. People are using a workaround in those channels, as I described at the moment. But yeah, so there'll be more functionality coming when the true breakout experience is released soon.
Yeah, cool. And just, I mean, obviously we hear a lot about some of the published changes in Teams, and click on the check for updates button quite regularly, and sort of, you know, sometimes it updates, sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes you don't see those features come through. Is there any way to accelerate that, to jump the queue, or to bring those changes forward to your organization?
Yeah, the main thing, and it's done it at a system level, is within Office 365. There's the team sort of admin console, and many of the IT administrators on the call will know about the different, what we call rings, of when sort of things are released, and you can be on quite conservative rings, which means that everything's tested, it's all sort of bedded down, and millions of people have tried it before, but it takes longer for you to get the latest updates. And then you can get on quite advanced rings, which are the idea of seeing new things, testing new things. And so there are possibilities of speeding up or slowing down the rate at which your organization moves forward with the Office product updates. So that's one way you could look at doing it.
Cool. Look, oh, here we go. All right, another question here, because we've got 5 minutes still of Trav's time. And look, I've been trying to get hold of Trav all week, so I know he's a really busy guy. This is a good opportunity to talk to him. So what about having a meeting default for staff and students meeting to be automatically presenter and attendee? At the moment, this is a 2-step process.
Yeah. So I'm not the full bottle on the back end policies around Teams, but one of the things we did just release is the idea that when you set up a meeting, you can, I think this is what you're describing as the 2-step process. You set up a meeting, you go to meeting options, and then you can choose who can present, who waits in a lobby, who doesn't wait in a lobby, those sorts of things. I think, I don't know for sure, but I think I've heard something about it being automated by you know, Active Directory roles or groups, so that the idea that would be what you describe is that if it knows I'm a teacher, and therefore when I set up something and I add a student to it, automatically apply these conditions. The key person within Microsoft to talk to if you've got a relationship is Jason LaGreca, who's on the product team for Teams for Education. And he might be able to shed a little bit more light on that if you hit him up on LinkedIn or something like that. Jason LaGreca is a great member of our team who's sort of talks to engineering all the time. So I think that's the two-step process you're describing at the moment, but I think the one-step process might be in the pipeline.
No, that's excellent. All right. Well, look, yeah, and I think that does answer because John has just said thank you. So look, we're going to take, thank you very much, Travis. That's great. Please stay on the call.
Yep.
We're going to take a little 2-minute break now just so you can get your Uber Eats and then we'll come back and we'll go on to Thomas. Travis, I'm not sure if you're still there, but I did see this thing with Zoom here is that we get a couple of questions coming in from different angles here. Diana from Cardinia says, a frustration with Teams updates is knowing when they will be available in the environment. We are waiting for the gallery view, which is available from August. Would Microsoft consider sharing their rollout schedule?
Yeah, I'd love it too. Diana, because we have the same challenge. So what Diana's referring to is that it used to be 4 people, now it's 3 by 3, which is 9, but 49 is coming. And so it's called large gallery view. And this is just, the challenge is with such scale is that it rolls out, and I'm sure Diana knows this, but it rolls out across the world at different times. So to publish a date is not something that, that they do because they don't want to be held to dates when it turns out that Asia took longer because there was some challenge with the, you know, the internet in that region at that time. So it is a scale challenge. I mean, the best thing is to stay up to date with what's going on in your in the admin center of your Office 365 environment. But even then, sometimes it does give you pretty loose dates. So I wish I had a better answer for you, Diana, but I don't, because it's the same with us. You know, we have features roll in, and it even happens within us at Microsoft, where some of the people in our team have a new feature, but some of us don't. And it sort of depends on where our identity is and lots of other bits and pieces within our environment as well. So no good answer for you, Diana.
Okay, and look, one more. We just got one more for you, chat. Has thought been given to allowing an admin account to delete calendar invites sent by other owners?
I don't really know. Add a bit more. Was that in the Q&A or the chat, Gav?
That was in the Q&A.
Okay, so whoever wrote that, maybe you can continue on and I'll respond to that. I don't think so, but I'd like to learn a little bit more about what's the scenario. So I don't think that exists at the moment, but maybe give me, whoever that was who asked the question, chuck a bit more context of what's the use case and what's the challenge, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, awesome. All right, look, big virtual round of applause for Trav. That was fantastic. We're going to move now on to Thomas Ferguson from Barracuda. Now, Thomas works with Barracuda's unique email security application, cloud security, network security, and data protection portfolios. He has extensive experience in design and deployment of networks, network security, email security, virtualization, Office 365, public cloud. Has been working with these technologies in the IT industry for the past 17 years. And now Barracuda, everyone sort of knows a lot about Barracuda. Lots of you already have Barracuda mail archiving solutions, etc. But we've seen this as a really popular product for schools and other organizations as well over the past sort of 6 months, as they've moved more into the Office 365 ecosystem and have found that requirement to do additional security or backup and restore, etc., to make sure that it secure the data and the assets that you're putting into Office 365. So everybody, just like to welcome Thomas. Thomas, the floor is yours.
No worries. Thanks for that, Gavin. Thanks for having the opportunity to be on here today. It's pretty exciting to be part of something like this. I suppose if any of you here don't really know who Barracuda are yet, or sort of what we do and what we offer or where we come from, we are an IT security and data protection organisation. Started 20 odd years ago, an old school ISP that was actually offering internet services, and we provided free email accounts with the internet services. And as it turned out, those email accounts started getting a whole lot of spam and junk sent to them. Barracuda developed its own email security filtering gateways and solutions to stop that spam, and then ended up dropping the ISP and becoming originally an email spam defense organization. And from there, we've sort of evolved with the threat landscape over the past 20 years as it becomes a bigger and nastier problem, to offering a whole range of various solutions around security, including a huge amount that are integrated and aligned with Microsoft. We're a gold certified ISV cloud partner with Microsoft, and work pretty heavily to develop some pretty unique solutions with them as well. So yeah, I mean, COVID, talking about the new world we're working in these days, shift to remote learning, remote working, all that sort of stuff, the unbelievable uptake of SaaS and, productivity solutions like 365, in my daughter's school, having a couple thousand of students and, a matter of a week, all move on to Teams. It must have been a pretty fun task for all of you on the call to actually make that occur for you guys if you weren't using those solutions. I know her school wasn't using them at all, and now they've got everyone on them. So it's a pretty epic thing to actually make happen in such a small amount of time. And seeing Microsoft throttle back access to all the services because it got so overwhelmed, the huge surge in uptake of their services. And with that, it's not surprising as well, that we've seen a massive surge and increase in malicious cyber activity related to that same change and related to COVID as well. And I suppose, there's been a lot of attacks that we've been seeing coming through directly related to COVID, using COVID as a theme, things like payment scams related to a JobKeeper and such. We've also seen a huge increase in the number of attacks designed just to exploit people and students because they're working from home and in that different environment. Now, obviously, this would probably look familiar, I suppose, to many of you. NAB Internet Banking sign-in page. This one, on-prem, webmail's login page. This one, Office 365 login page. Now, these are all recent hoax replicas. They're all fakes. They're all hosted by malicious actors, but they're really good examples of some of the complexity of the threats we actually face these days. They're put together very, very well. Take this, this Office 365 login page, and attempted credential stealing here. This is probably going to end up in some sort of account takeover by stealing people's credentials and abusing accounts without things like multi-factor authentication turned on. Relevant to COVID times, there's so many people in this world who've had to shift to logging into these sorts of portals far more often than they used to, or for the first time at all. And they're susceptible to falling victim to many of this. And I suppose the real issue with a lot of it is the people that actually come into contact with these sites and then do fall for them. Now, many of you, been in the IT space, you'd know who Gartner is, been a leading, IT analyst body. And this quote, I reckon, is really true, that people influence security more than technology or policy. And it's largely because most of these cases, it's the action of a person in these scenarios which is seen as a trigger to a successful incident or a breach. And this is also a large part of the reason, some of these attacks are so successful. It's because of the people that are actually triggering them to become active. Now, if you look at, I suppose, the evolution of email, threats and attacks over time and consider where we started, back in the day, to a degree, what we look at now was actually very simple for us to stop a lot of it. They had markers in there, they had keywords, they had, malicious payloads we could act on, we could pick up and detect. But obviously things evolved over time. Malicious actors got much, much better at working out exactly how to get around all those defenses. And we've got to the point that, yeah, we're great at defending ourselves against some of those traditional, old school threats. But the more complex stuff is the stuff that, a lot of people are really struggling to stop getting into their environments. So take something like service impersonation. This is one of these new threats that's becoming really, really common. Impersonating people, getting these through in your inbox. These sort of emails, they're well designed. They've got no malicious payload. A lot of the traditional markers that we use to block these threats aren't there. They're often sent from other hijacked email boxes, hijacked websites, or hosting these pages. So from a reputation perspective, there's no reason for most filtering services to actually block a lot of these attacks. So they're very successful in getting through to a lot of people's inboxes. The way these threats are being delivered as well, unfortunately, they're exploiting a lot of the basic pitfalls of the email protocol itself. The manipulation of email headers, for example, to pretend to be somebody else. Email itself, when you think about it, where it came from, it was never actually built with the intention of someone using it as a malicious tool. It never really had any security around it. We've just managed to wrap a lot of stuff around there over time to try and defend us from its inherent shortfalls. Basically needing to look at us to find new ways to really stop a lot of these threats getting through. Now, all of these stuff, typically speaking, they are designed the same way. They've got the same sort of urgency or call to action to try and get people to want to act on an email like this coming through. They always try and use some sort of way to gain credibility, reference an authority, reference a person, a service, or something like that, to see if people then fall victim to it. They're also very, very targeted. And I suppose if you look at where some of these actually start, the first phase of a lot of these attacks we're seeing, it goes completely unnoticed, and it's usually because it involves reconnaissance. Now, some of the people on this call, I suppose, may have noticed I actually looked at a lot of your LinkedIn accounts before today. It's really interesting to see how many people have got public info on a website that's openly accessible, that's relating them to their company, and giving a malicious actor a target to abuse. They can go in there, get your email, they can look through the chain of people that work at that company, find a superior, and craft an email pretending to be your superior directly to you with all the right references to your company. So it's this sort of thing we really need to start looking at, understanding where we're exposed on the internet, where we're putting this information that's going to be used maliciously. And again, when you look at people, I suppose kids working from home and things like that, they're on stuff like social media more as well. They're looking at, silly quizzes and questions on things like Facebook saying, what would you look like when you're 50? Or, silly stuff like, what's your pornography name? And things like that. And a lot of these questions and stuff that they're looking at are asking them things like, what's your birthday? What's the street name that you first lived in? And most aren't aware that these are usually scraping data and information to use to access your password recovery questions on most of your accounts. It's a really common way people fall victim to having their accounts, breached, is because they don't realize that all of this is just data scraping to be used against them. So people really need to sort of look at security, I suppose, as more of a culture now and not just an afterthought to happen once something gets breached. Now, I did want to talk about, Travis was talking earlier on about AI and that sort of thing, and what we can actually do to defend ourselves against some of these new threats. Now, I'll try to get through this quickly because I know I'm running out of a bit of time here, but looking at, the massive uptake in things like Office 365, mailboxes moved there that didn't used to be there. Work habits have changed, times have changed, but all the threats that used to be there are still there, both from a new perspective and a traditional perspective. All that volumetric spam that used to be around, the Viagra, the pornography, the Rolex watch style spam, it's all still there on the internet. Plus, we've got these new things that we have to defend against as well. If you look at the way typically that email defense is done from threats, there's usually two trains of thoughts. There used to be what you consider an email gateway approach, where you'd have something at the edge of a network or in front of a solution, and it filtered against all of that old school spam. And it was able to look at things like payloads. We could explode and use sandboxing to look at malicious, intentions inside documents and, all that sort of stuff. But all those new threats we're seeing, we can't use those same traditional markers to pick up and detect and, defend ourselves against those. So we see a lot of those, more advanced, newer threats passing straight through email gateway style solutions. And to make matters worse, if we see something like an account takeover occur, someone's mailbox gets, taken by a malicious actor, and they're sending emails laterally or internally inside an Office 365 environment, those don't necessarily cross an email gateway solution. So that can't actually see those emails going around, much less recognize that they're actually illegitimate. So this is where we involve something we call API-based inbox defense. So again, Travis was mentioning the positive impacts of artificial intelligence, and that's part of how this API defense actually works. So consider that everyone using email is very unique. They do this, they do that. They send email to certain people, they receive it from certain people at certain times of day. They use certain sentiments, certain language, certain tones inside there. So what if we could build, a map or a graph to understand and analyze and consider that behavior around each person's unique characteristics inside an email environment. And then you can use that as a reference point from a threat perspective, right? So if you attach, a machine learning and an AI engine to that idea and start building a database, analyzing and understanding each person's individual ways of using email, we can actually then use that same system to detect anomalies inside those email behaviors. So, someone, Bob usually emails Gavin, saying certain things written in a certain way, but then Gavin gets an email from Bob that's not quite the same tone, or is making unusual requests inside that email. That email may not have typical, weaponized payloads attached to it, but because of the way that email's been written and the way the email's been used, we're able to use that, compare it to our, our database and our graph of that person's behaviors and go, no, this is not a typical behavior for this person. This doesn't make sense. They're making an unusual or a threatening request, And from that, we can use that to really, really effectively block all of these new levels of threats, the blackmails, the threatening things inside emails, the service impersonations. We can pick out all these abnormal inconsistencies and use that really effectively. And one of the great things about doing it in a machine learning sense is that over time it grows and gets stronger and stronger. It learns more of your behaviors, more of what you're doing, and is able to pick up more threats. And then as malicious actors are going to evolve their threat to try and get through those defenses, the system should be able to learn and adapt as that goes through. So we've been doing this for a while now at Barracuda and have gotten very good at it. And we're able to block a lot of really interesting threats using that. And it's got to the point now where we're starting to use and consider these same AI and machine learning engines and apply that in other ways. So if you consider with an API-based inbox defense system that we are attached to your Office 365 mailbox, we can see everything in there, including internal emails. And if we're thinking about a sentiment analysis or looking at people's language and tone inside emails, we can apply that to something like bullying inside a school. Imagine kids sending bullying or threatening emails to each other inside a 365 environment. If we use that AI and machine learning to look at the way those emails are written and realize that they're a threatening email or an offensive email or something like that, it gives us some really interesting ways to look at, I suppose, different threats that we actually hadn't considered before. So I had a bit more to talk about, but I might wrap it up there, Gavin, so I don't go too long.
No, look, we've got a few more minutes. I mean, I've got a question here that we knew that Barracuda can provide cybersecurity protection for Office 365, but what about data protection, long-term backup?
Look, that's what I was going to talk about.
Well, go ahead.
If I've got a bit more time, I will go into it.
4 more minutes. Let's go for it.
Oh, I probably can't cover it in 2, but I will go through some of what I was going to talk about. So, yeah, data protection and especially discovery. So, yeah, Office 365, wicked, awesome productivity solutions, right? Cool tools. But yeah, there are a few small limitations and caveats around some of their data retention, their protection, their discovery facilities inside there. I did have a case recently where someone come to us, they've like everyone else, moved to Teams really rapidly. And they had a class that they were teaching, and the class naturally started using Teams like it's supposed to be used, saving files and stuff in there. And something happened to delete all those files. They're not sure why or what. And what ended up happening is to get them all back, they had to restore an entire SharePoint library back into its place and override a whole lot of other data in the process. So it's sort of the lesser of two evils to get that data back. And it's because of some of the little caveats in 365 that we are existing, and we work with Microsoft to help put a bit of enhancement around, backup, archiving, retention stuff in 365. So we do offer backup and archiving solutions on 365. And if you look at, I suppose, let me I'll talk about some of the unusual things inside 365 systems. I might jump through a little bit of what we've got here. So archiving firstly. So yes, so I mean, I'm sure Travis will correct me, but many people understand the educational plans in 365. Most of them, I think, actually offer unlimited archiving on them. I know the staff plans do anyway. But when you look at the way archiving is actually built and works in 365, it's a SaaS platform. It's an extremely large scale SaaS platform. And they do have to do some interesting things to deal with containing and managing such epic volumes of data. And there's various caveats and catches when you look at that from a 365 perspective. So the idea of unlimited archiving, it actually expands and gives you that unlimited ability by attaching 10 gigabyte chunks of storage space each time an unlimited archive needs more space. It expands by itself. Now, when it does that, it actually creates a separate chunk of storage that sits in a different storage cluster to the rest of the mailbox. And that gives it some really weird characteristics when you look at it from a usability perspective. So it creates an additional folder down underneath an online archive. And the only way to actually search for data as a user inside the extra chunks of storage that get attached is to find that folder inside 365, select its current folder as the search scope and search in that folder, which is a bit funny and confusing. Also, the idea of having an archive in 365 where you can actually delete emails seems a bit unusual. And that's obviously why you've got the ability to turn on things like litigation hold, legal hold, and that sort of thing. But that in itself also has a number of other caveats when you look at data retention in 365. The idea of if someone's, for whatever reason, turns off litigation hold, or you can pretty much watch your data or just get obliterated. Now, from a backup perspective as well, let me just jump forward a bit. We're probably all well aware, and Microsoft will happily tell you, and so will probably Travis on this call, that they do not provide backup services as such. And all their product descriptions do have lines in there saying, point in time restoration is out of scope for this particular service. They don't actually offer backup. They do obviously offer retention periods though, to give you some leeway there so that you don't necessarily lose data straight up. But again, with being an extremely scalable, very large platform, there is always a limitation and a point where that stops. So Office 365, yes, retention periods on different products. Exchange Online, 14 days by default, you can extend that out. OneDrive and SharePoint, 93 days. SharePoint's got an additional 14-day period for a manual recovery by Microsoft if you do lose a lot of data. But this does mean you have to overwrite the entire site if you want to restore from one of Microsoft SharePoint backups, so you will lose other data that's been placed in there in between that time. But there is, again, a catch to this. So if you read through some of the documentation and the services, it states that outside that 93 days, inside that 93 days, if the recycle bin reaches its quota, so this is the SharePoint or the OneDrive recycle bins, or it's full, the service actually starts deleting the oldest item by itself after just 3 days. Or for whatever reason, an administrator empties the SharePoint and recycled OneDrive recycle bins, the second stage recycle bins, that data just gets gone. So it disappears with no options for recovery. And that's pretty much why, Barracuda and other vendors like us exist, producing better or more enhanced archiving and backup solutions to complement what 365 can actually offer. So we've got solutions available that sort of cover off all the pitfalls here. We've got a full email protection stack as well that will work around a lot of these sort of shortfalls and problems. So the idea of unlimited archiving, we can provide that, because we're focusing on just that particular product and not having to deal with a lot of the stuff. We can provide truly unlimited archiving that never has any limits. You don't need to worry about things with our archiving, like ex-staff members or ex-students will cover off all data regardless. And then similarly with backups, backup true point in time recovery, not just recovery, but down to granular recovery, be able to recover individual folders, individual files and items straight back into SharePoint Online. Be able to recover, an individual file out of someone's OneDrive back into their OneDrive, or even down to the version level. We back up versions inside OneDrive as well, and are able to recover those straight back into Office 365. So yeah, it's something people really need to consider if they're going to go pushing, a whole organization onto Office 365. that just because it's a SaaS platform, and be it not Office 365, you look at the others, G Suite, you look at some of the other ones in the world, that, any of them, they don't necessarily mean your data's all backed up and your data's all covered off. There was always going to be a point where a SaaS product reaches its limit, and it needs other solutions to complement that to give you a better outcome. I won't keep going, Gavin. I'll just keep talking otherwise.
Excellent. Thanks, Thomas. And look, I know that a number of you on the call here have already got Barracuda Essentials to protect your email. I know that a number of you are looking at it. If you haven't looked at it or don't have it already, it's a fantastic product. We've certainly got a good offer going on at the moment where students are protected for free as well if you put your staff on this for free for 3 years. So if you need any more information about this, please get in contact with me or anybody from the Trident sales team. All right, thank you very much, Thomas. Virtual round of applause as well for Thomas. Well done. Thank you, mate. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Jeff, who will introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Gav, and thanks, Thomas. That was very, very informative and educational, so thank you. Going on to our last speaker, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Lior Roshberger. Lior, as you all know, within the education space, is the owner and developer and founder of Vivi, which many of you schools use. But today's discussion is probably going to be a bit of a hybrid one, but due to the current environment with COVID-19 and from the health perspective and the DNA perspective, Lior is going to touch on the importance of genetic technology in winning the COVID-19 war. So I expect this to be very informative. And Lior, over to you, but you do have a little bit long. If you need a little bit more time, feel free to use it up. So please welcome Lior Roshberger. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, and the broader Trident team. Good to connect with everyone in these unusual times. So yeah, I won't talk about Vivi because I think given COVID, the DNA element is probably a lot more interesting. And I've put together about half a dozen slides, which I'll take you through, but I want to leave plenty of time to ask questions because some of these topics are very topical, controversial, political, you name it. So we'll go through some topics. Can everyone hear me quite clearly, Jeff? Yeah, we're good?
Yep, all good.
Fantastic. Okay, I'll just share my screen now. All right, we've got that screen up. So the importance of the genetic technology winning the COVID war. So many of you that I know well know that I'm equally passionate around DNA health as I am education. And I think you hear genetics and COVID thrown around in the newspapers a bit and on the media. And I just want to sort of provide some basic information, explain to you the relevance and the context. So genome sequencing, as shown here, is a process of figuring out all the information that's encoded in an organism. And that could be any organism, yeah? It could be us as humans, it could be animals, it could be plants. And here we're talking about the genetic sequence of a virus being the coronavirus or COVID-19. And so different viruses, some viruses actually are made up of DNA. So all humans are made up of DNA, but coronaviruses are actually made up of RNA, which is kind of like a first cousin to DNA. It's slightly different properties, slightly different proteins, but it is still the blueprint or the building blocks of the coronavirus. It is RNA. So in fact, when you go and have, if anyone's had a throat swab and it goes off to the lab, they're actually the technology they're looking at is actually looking at the RNA in your throat swab to see if it contains the COVID-19 RNA. That's what the gold standard test is at the moment when everyone has a coronavirus test that everyone's been asked to do if they have any symptoms, yeah? Unlike our DNA, so human beings have 3 billion letters, 3 billion. The coronavirus only has 30,000 letters of RNA. So it's a very simple structure, but it's very, very conniving at the same time. And part of what's trying to be understood, you can see that little diagram I've shown in the top right-hand corner, is that we sort of know that it sort of started from it's a proposed, coronaviruses started originally from bats. Yeah, we've been exposed to many coronaviruses over the years, and COVID-19 specifically, they're trying to still work out through genetic testing, how did it get from being a bat virus, which was COVID-19, into humans? Was there an intermediate host? Did it pass directly? The jury's still out on that. That hasn't been established, but it's going to be very interesting, and genetics will help absolutely identify the origins, I suppose, of COVID-19. So the catchword is really genetic epidemiology. And that really means, I mean, we hear epidemiology be talked about when, you know, in our press conferences from the premiers and all the chief medical officers. So originally, if we understand the genetic structure of COVID-19, it can tell us what is the virus like, is the virus changing, and how is the virus being transmitted. And that information is really important for our health officials to actually put out sound advice. It has been a bit chaotic in Victoria lately, but nonetheless, it is quite important that information holds a lot of the secrets. And so this is how genetic sequencing technology, when we look at all the RNA of COVID-19, has been used in different ways, and it's really evolved. But really the coronavirus, I think, was actually fully sequenced within 7 days of being discovered in China, which is a record in all of mankind. So within 7 days, we knew the entire blueprint, or China did anyway, back in early January, even late December, of COVID-19. I think it was actually sequenced on the 7th of January from memory. And as we've moved into what was initially an outbreak and has become an epidemic, pandemic, and now it's proliferating around the world, the kind of things that the genetic technologies can help us, they can help us do something which I'll talk about shortly, is immune profiling individual responses to disease. And I'll talk to that further, but that can provide some very valuable insights on how to fight this disease. And also, you know, how come some people, you can see here, why are we seeing that children are not certainly being as hit as hard with this virus and not transmitting as much. So that, you know, the answer to those very important questions are in the genetic sequencing of it. So here's the virus tracking. So we hear a little bit, if you recall in the press, we heard that using genomic technology, that people have worked out that this cluster is related to that cluster, yeah, or that's the person 0 in that cluster. And that's how how it's sort of moved around, either a state or a region or country, or, you know, in this image, you can see how it's moved around the world. So what actually happens, that every time someone gets infected with COVID-19, I'll actually show you, I might show you in the next slide, you can see here, there's what's called a little mutation. So if you imagine the letters, and this is just for explanatory purposes, you can imagine, say this was, you know, on the left here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this is the sort of the genetic profile of the virus in 6 patients that were infected with COVID-19. And what you can see is that each time the virus infects someone, a few letters change, or what we call mutate, yes? And it's by basically tracking how those letters change, or how the virus of the COVID-19 in that person changes or mutates, that they can actually build no different to a genealogy or an ancestry tree to say that this person got it from that person, and so on and so forth, yes? And that can really provide some really valuable insights in how the virus is transmitted. And that's why when you hear the Victorian Chief Health Officer, and you hear it also now with the inquiry that's happening in Melbourne, say that it is conceivable that every single outbreak case in Melbourne that we're suffering from restrictions can be traced back to the quarantine guards. That's because they actually have the genomic data that demonstrates that. They have actually built a tree, which is, you know, doesn't really help everyone in stage 4 restrictions, but that's how they know where the cases have come from originally. It's very interesting. And so moving on to that thing that I talked about early is the genetic, you know, why is it that some people, and this is not just for COVID-19, but, you know, many of you would have experienced firsthand where both you and your partners have got sick, you know, presumably with the same cold or the same virus or the same flu. One of you gets completely hammered by it, and the other one, you know, just has a sniffle for 3 or 4 days. It's no different with coronavirus, yeah? We're desperate as a society to understand what is it that makes some people get smashed with COVID-19, need to be hospitalized, need to be intubated, or need to get oxygen, or worse, and some people are completely asymptomatic. Now, there's lots of theories out there, and it's still not clear, and there's certainly links to, obviously, age, to comorbidities, underlying medical conditions, there's links to obesity. There's no questions that many of those answers will be discovered in time from understanding the genetic variance between people. Yeah, there is no question. There's a lot still to be unpacked, but you can see here there is quite a lot of studies going on, and the image that I've got here in the bottom right-hand corner, this is really actually looking at the genetic profile, the sequencing. This is actually how a DNA or an RNA read looks, yeah? And this is looking at 3 different cases And they're saying, well, why do people with this genetic makeup, need to be hospitalized and require supplemental oxygen? And there are other people, this case 3 on the right-hand side, have had no symptoms whatsoever. And that's what they're doing. And they're actually using, we heard both Travis and Thomas talk about AI and machine-based learning. And if anything, it's got a lot of use in is this, because what they will need to do is input all the data and try and see the patterns that explains why some people are getting smashed and other people are having hardly any symptoms at all. And clearly the bioinformatics piece or the data analytics piece is going to be pivotal to really find, for researchers to use the masses of data that we're collecting to find these really important individual responses to how people react. And so the next area, and I'm nearly done, and I'm sure there might be some interesting questions, or I hope there are, is vaccines. I mean, we're all hearing about vaccines. I mean, the only way out of this is either some form of vaccine or some better therapeutics, yeah? So that at least people that are unfortunate enough to become unwell and be hospitalized, at least there is something that we can actively treat them with and hopefully help them get better quicker. But traditionally, there are over 80 companies across, I think, 20 countries now that are actively working on the COVID vaccine. But just so you understand, the traditional way of actually creating a vaccine normally takes up to 10 years, yes? Now, I'm sure none of us want to be in this condition for the next 10 years. So, if they do create a vaccine in the next 6, 9, or 12 months, it will be the fastest time a vaccine's ever been created in human history. They are trying, I mean, amongst those 80 companies working on a vaccine, some are trying the traditional approaches where they basically get the virus, they create they weaken the virus, and that's the traditional vaccines that we've all been, vaccinated of: measles, mumps, rubella, etc. But if we can actually crack the COVID-19 vaccine using genetic engineering, whereas rather than using the traditional way, they actually are genetically creating, like actually manufacturing the blueprint of a inactive coronavirus, and that would be injected to people, well, then it could really truncate the timetable from years to months. Yeah, I mean, that's the great hope. And that's, different companies are trying different methods, and fingers crossed, fingers crossed that we will have a vaccine. But understanding, again, the profile of the virus really is influential in being able to efficiently form a vaccine. And I think this is my last slide before I've got any questions. I know I've gone pretty quickly, but this is really interesting. So there's a new technology. It's not so new anymore, but it's been around for a few years, which is called CRISPR technology. You can see there's CRISPR, and that's really about gene editing. So it really is molecular scissors, yeah? And you can see that image on the top left. It really is cutting in to the genetic code of an organism, any organism, humans, viruses, etc., and actually changing the structure or changing the letters, yes? It is it raises, this whole gene editing raises a whole Pandora's box of both ethical and legal questions, yes? And it's sort of being supported in some countries and condoned in others. But nonetheless, there's two ways that we could use gene editing into the future. One way you can see there, I've shown that if we could actually edit the actual RNA of COVID-19 to actually make it harmless or much less effective. At the moment, the way it jumps onto the lungs and the way it attacks the body, it's pretty virulent. Or not on the virus side, there's also, and this is particularly controversial, is actually to edit human DNA to make them resistant to COVID-19. There was actually quite famously, well, he's not so famous anymore, but there was this group of Chinese researchers a couple of years ago at a London global genetic conference that got up and said that they had used CRISPR technology. They basically, while they're doing IVF, they had taken a couple of embryos before implanting them into a woman in China, and they had edited some of the embryo genes to make them resistant to HIV infection. So this Chinese researcher announced it a few years ago. Everyone's jaws dropped in the room. Couldn't believe it had been done. Never been done before in a human being. That person's gone, those researchers have gone missing because the whole global community was flabbergasted that someone had actually edited the genes of a human being. But those two children were born, so they implanted 2 embryos in this woman, and these 2 children were born, so they are actually genetically modified humans from China. and those 2 researchers have gone missing in China. So I don't know, I'm not sure they actually exist anymore. I think they've been removed because China was embarrassed that they had done it without ethical approval and without all the requirements. But it's really interesting. Certainly if we could edit the genes of COVID, edit the RNA to make it harmless or not as virulent or not as aggressive, that would be a wonderful improvement of where we're at the moment. So that's the, oops, sorry, that's the, I think I stopped the screen sharing. They're the questions that I had, or there's the slides that I had. I'm happy to open up, Gavin, to any questions.
Yeah, Lior, actually, we've got a whole bunch here. Steve Archibald, you're on fire here, buddy. So we've got here, why are some affected more than others? Which I think you kind of touched on a little bit there that we really know.
So Steve, yeah, I mean, it's a great question. The reality is, because coronavirus is so novel, there's so much we don't know. There is so much we don't know, and we just haven't had enough time, even though we've had time since February, to actually run clinical trials and studies to actually be able to prove different things. You know, it takes a while to actually prove cause and effect in any scientific study. There are lots of theories about why some people are hammered. I mean, they are saying one of the largest risk factors, I mean, we all know that the elderly are suffering more, and we don't really understand why though. I mean, we understand clearly that as you get older, your body's natural immune system weakens. You can't create neutralizing antibodies to fight any infection as effectively. So clearly with COVID-19, which is fairly aggressive, it's particularly hard, and that's why people that are 70, 80, and 90s are heavily over-indexed in those that we're seeing mortality of from COVID. I've seen a lot of studies out of the US that actually says, for similar reasons, that obesity, for people that are very overweight, again, their immune systems are not attacking, are not neutralizing the COVID virus as effectively as well. So that's being shown to be quite a risk factor. But to answer Stephen's question, the real why is still to be determined. I don't think we're going to know for a little while yet. Yeah, but if we knew, it would be terribly helpful. Because if we knew that those people, because of those morbidities or because of that, because they have this genetic profile, are really going to struggle, but everyone else is actually okay, yeah, then what actually could is that we can say, let's just really protect those people, and the rest of us can get on and live life and not be so scared around COVID-19, because it's not that much worse than some other viruses. But the reality is we don't have that data yet, and so we have to assume that everyone could get seriously hammered, even though, that's not really the case out there. I mean, there is a lot of fear mongering and a lot of hysteria going on around COVID-19. I think there's some serious overreactions happening. That's my personal, sometimes not popular opinion, but hopefully we'll learn over the coming 6 or 9 months of why some people, have a very different response to many others. Yeah.
And is that something that MyDNA can predict? Do you think? Is that something that you guys are working on?
Yeah, so we are involved with a couple of research projects, but it's not really in our core wheelhouse, but we're certainly following the science very carefully. But yes, I think eventually we will be able to know that. The complicating factor with genetics is that, I mentioned before, there are 3 billion letters, yeah, so each of us have in each of our cells, yeah, each cell has 3 billion letters, that's the DNA code. So that is an enormous amount of data that needs to be analyzed to actually understand why someone's different to another. And a lot of these genes interact. It's not just a one-to-one relationship, it's a one-to-many, or they call polygenic. So I think it's going to take a lot of a lot of very smart biological mathematicians or bioinformaticians to try and work out why is it but they will eventually. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I think it will be a few years before we have all those insights understood. Yeah.
And would you try a Russian cure by Christmas?
No, I would not.
Not rush in to take that then.
No, look. I think what people don't appreciate, making a vaccine that is actually safe is actually very, very hard. It's very complicated. There are so many parts, both on a molecular level and a functional level, things can go wrong. And that's why the average vaccine takes 10 years. It always has taken 10 years. And that's also why that despite living with different forms of coronaviruses, not COVID-19, but coronaviruses have been around for a long time, no one's ever been able to create a vaccine for coronavirus, ever. Right? So it's not simple. No, I think that I would not be rushing to take a vaccine. I don't want to be a Russian guinea pig, and that's not being disrespectful to the country of Russia. But I think you know, I'd rather be on like version 3 of the vaccine than version 1. I think, yes, because even once they actually find a vaccine and go through all the clinical trials, then they've got to work out how to produce enough doses. I mean, it's quite a step. Yes, look, I'd love it to come early. Like, I'm fully over these restrictions and how we're living, but I think we're a while off yet. We really are. I can't see it happening till middle of next year at best. Yeah.
And we've got one here from Ross Congleton from Scotch College. If the vaccine is being developed using genetic engineering, any more or less effective than the traditional way they are developed?
So yeah, great question. So whether the traditional way where you make a weakened version of the actual virus or you genetically engineer a harmless virus, they both are trying to create the same response. You know, they're trying to mimic the virus and get your body's natural immune system to create antibodies. So next time it sees the real virus, it has the antibodies and you're effectively immune, or you have a degree of immunity. So it's potentially quicker if you can actually crack the code and genetically engineer it, but how they work is actually identical, and the type of response of the body forming antibodies to it is actually identical as well. So it's just really, what do you inject in there to create the same response? And so it's not necessarily better, it's really just could be a lot more efficient a development process. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, look, just to wrap this up, hydroxychloroquine.
Oh, yeah.
Can't even say it. Not going to take it. But
Pharmacogenomics.
yeah, and I was going to say Jeff needs a new word because
I've got it.
he's worn out pharmacy. Yeah,
Epidemiology.
yeah.
Yes, genetic. You're very good, Jeff. Hydroxychloroquine. Look, I haven't studied it myself in depth. I mean, it's been an anti-malarial drug for decades. Yeah, it's a bit of a dirty drug, and I think it's only become more political, this drug, because of Donald Trump. Yeah, I mean, he has made this drug much more polarizing than it actually needed to be. Look, I know that in a lot of New York hospitals, they were using it on people that were very unwell, like really unwell, like in ICU. And there was, you know, there's been some data to show that it has had some impact, but it's got only limited impact in terms of in people that are really severely ill. And to be honest, Gavin, those people, they're throwing everything at it. Like they're trying everything. Yeah. So I've seen some studies that say it's not particularly effective. I've seen some studies saying it actually does drop the mortality rate by 30, 40, 50%, which is a lot. Yes. And it's probably a bit of both are true in some respects. I think it's in the context it's used, the clinical settings. It is complicated. Yeah. But to be honest, you know, if I would not be taking it if you are just early on in your illness or you just got a sore throat or cold or preventatively. No, I'm not sure that's very wise. And that's what Trump he was showing off at that press conference that he was. But I'm sure they will find that there is a role for that drug with people that are really unwell in intensive care. I'm sure there'll be some studies that will show that is actually useful. But the reality is we don't want to really get there, do we? Because once you get there, you're in trouble, which way you look at it, yeah? So, you know, the key is, you know, protect those that are vulnerable and let everyone else live sensibly.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Look, thanks very much, Lior. I think we're rounded off there. So again, another virtual round of applause for Lior, and I'm going to hand over to Jeff to round this off. Thank you.
Thanks, Gav, and thanks, Lior. That was fantastic. Firstly, I'd like to thank all our keynote speakers, Travis, Thomas, and Lior. That was exceptional presentations. I'd also like to thank Barracuda on being the sponsor for the event. And I did like one of your sayings in there, Thomas's, where you had, but there is a catch. And I take that's a very good marketing term used from Barracuda to put that in. So congratulations on that. I would also like to say that if you've got any further questions or your queries, or you want to look at some of the presentations, we have videotaped this, so we're happy to share that link with you. And we're at that time, we always want to make sure we finish it at the allocated 2:30 time, so we're 6 minutes in front. So again, thanks so much for your contribution, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you.